A lucky orbit of the International Space Station permitted its crew and us this one-of-a-kind view of Sarychev volcano in an early stage of eruption on June 12, 2009. A hole in the overhead clouds, possibly caused by the shock wave from the explosion, allowed a clear view of the plume and pyroclastic flow down the sides of the mountain. If we pay attention to the cloud cover around the edges of the island, we notice that there is an almost perfect circle surrounding the island, uncovering our view. Scientists actually disagree about its formation. Intuition argues that there must have been a shock wave that has moved the clouds over a side, or the hot air has made the clouds evaporate. But another explanation given is that the hole in the clouds has nothing to do with the eruption at all, but rather with the fact that air above the island is warmer than marine air, and this forces the clouds to evaporate, a phenomena exclusive to islands that are surrounded by oceans with cool surface temperatures, such as the Kuril Islands. For the inhabitants of these islands, the eruption is nothing new. Sarychev rarely sleeps for more than a decade, and it is only one of some 30 or 40 active volcanoes on this island chain, which is situated arguably at the easternmost point of Russia. Arguably because the easternmost edge of Russia is officially defined as Big Diomede Island in Chukotka Autonomous Okrug. If we would draw a straight line from there to Moscow, that line would be about 6,300 kilometers. But drawing it from the Kuril Islands, that line would be well over 7,000 kilometers. I also assume that the furthest we could get away from the Kuril Islands while staying in Russia would be in Kaliningrad, the country's westernmost point. And while it is a distance that crosses almost 8,000 kilometers, we can do better if we include the somewhat recently annexed Crimea, stretching our ruler about 8,180 kilometers southwest from the Kurils, and still be in Russian land. So considering the vast majority of the Russian population lives in the west, the Kuril Islands are well and truly remote. Some of the most sparsely populated places in the most disconnected distant parts of the country. And life here is somewhat bleak, plain and simple. Extreme weather, poor communications with the continent, 100% markup on all imported goods, all of which come from mainland Russia, and a constant threat of natural disasters. So despite its beauty, tourists do not arrive in droves. Also, you can't just turn up to any of these islands on a whim. The Kuril Islands are a frontier zone, so you need to obtain a permit from the authorities beforehand, even if you are Russian. The Kuril Islands is made up of 56 islands that stretches over 1,200 kilometers, from the southern tip of Russia's Kamchatka Peninsula to the northern tip of Japan. It's a land of extremes, of snow and volcanoes, of sea lions, Arctic foxes, and abandoned military bases. The islands form part of the ring of tectonic instability encircling the Pacific Ocean, commonly referred to as the Ring of Fire. The islands themselves are summits of stratovolcanoes that are a direct result of the subduction of the Pacific Plate under the Okhotsk Plate. And so, on one side of the islands, there's the cold northern Pacific Ocean. On the other, the bitterly freezing Sea of Okhotsk. If the wind blows from the south, it can be warm and humid. If from the north, a Siberian chill can take over. So the weather is unpredictable, but generally, in winter, it's always cold, with snow up to the waist. And you can tell by the rugged vegetation that grows here. The most northern of the islands actually can't support trees. You have to travel at least halfway down the islands before you can find anything resembling a tree. Life here is hard, and only the toughest of the tough would try to adapt to its requirements. These people are known as the Ainu, are hunter-gatherers who have their own distinct language and culture, including a vibrant and original storytelling tradition. Their ancestors also adorned themselves with unique facial tattoos, which they considered part of their religion. The Ainu are traditionally animists, believing that everything in nature has a kamui, spirit, or a god on the inside, and the names of the most of the islands come from their language. But we can't exactly say how many pure Ainu are living on the islands or in Japan anymore, as they have mostly assimilated into Russian and Japanese populations. The total landmass of all these islands is slightly less than that of Israel or Slovenia, or about half the size of Belgium, and its population is only around 20,000 spread over 4 of the islands, and concentrated in 3 main urban centers. There are also a few tiny hamlets, plus seasonal fishing villages, which come to life in the summer after hibernating the winter. Paramurshir is the second largest of the Kuril Islands. Its name is derived from the Ainu language for broad island or populous island. Geologically, Paramurshir is a continuous chain of 23 volcanoes. At least 5 of them are active. Yuzhno Kurilsk is the only permanently populated settlement here, and it suffered a tragic natural disaster some 60 years ago, as it was originally founded on the Pacific Ocean side of the island, which turned out to be fatal. As in 1952, a tsunami washed it away, with at least 2,336 of the town's 6,000 inhabitants. The tragedy was kept secret as per Soviet tradition, only to become declassified in the early 90s after USSR's collapse. Yuzhno Kurilsk was rebuilt at a safer distance from the shore and on higher ground. Following the dissolution of the Soviet Union in 1990, the population of the island decreased from some 2,500 to less than 2,000, and villages that once lined the coasts are now ghost towns. The new Yuzhno Kurilsk is surprisingly welcoming. It's hardly the liveliest place on earth, but it has most amenities you would expect from a normal small town that permits its inhabitants to get on with relatively normal, modern lives. A typical winter morning often begins with healthy exercise in the form of digging their way out of their homes, as the snow has most likely barricaded their doors. For this reason, all doors open inwards. Some roads here are made of reinforced concrete, but most are just dirt tracks. Cars tend to be SUVs that can cope with the poor road situation, and most are old right-hand drive ones imported from Japan, complete with heavy-duty cross-country tires. There are 3 main occupations: fish, fishing, and catching fish. The sea is what provides almost all the inhabitants with their livelihood. Matua Island. This spot in the middle of the Kuril Islands is the lock placed on the entrance to the Sea of Okhotsk, a volcano-shaped lock. When the Sea of Okhotsk became domestic in 2014 and 52,000 square kilometers of formerly international waters came under Russian jurisdiction, the country had to take a fresh look at the defense of its eastern borders. It needed to obtain a full-fledged military base on one side of the Kuril Islands to ensure the safety of waters of the Sea of Okhotsk and a large part of the eastern coast of Russia. Matua was the obvious choice. In May and June 2014, the Defense Ministry and the Russian Geographical Society made an exploratory expedition to the island, fortifying it and discovering its militaristic history. During the Second World War, Matua Island was one of Japan's most fortified bases. Many of the other Kuril Islands were also fortified. Matua was on another level. Soviet troops risked serious losses assaulting it during the final days of World War II. Underground bunkers with walls that are up to 1.5 meters thick, large caliber guns, and a military airfield with 3 runways. These findings have led many to speculate that the Japanese military may have been hiding something here. According to various accounts, the Japanese may have built a secret transshipment base for their submarine fleet, a top-secret research lab, and even a repository for the Empire's treasures. The Soviets, luckily, never had to assault the island, since the Japanese gave up themselves. But all the really valuable stuff was probably burnt, blown up, or sent to the bottom of the ocean at the hands of the Japanese themselves before it was handed over to the Soviets. In 2016, some 200 Russian officials and technical experts made an expedition to the island as a part of a plan to rehabilitate the derelict 1.2-kilometer Soviet airfield and establish a new naval and logistical forward military base. So a new 1,400-meter runway was built between 2016 and 2019. Matua Island is the sort of place where James Bond movies are set, holding secrets we are unlikely to answer. On 26 November 1941, a Japanese carrier fleet with 26 vessels and 4 aircraft carriers departed Hitokapo Bay on the eastern shore of Iturup. Its target, Pearl Harbor. The bay is now called Kasatka Bay. Iturup is the northernmost island that is disputed between Russia and Japan, a contentious issue that has stopped Russia and Japan from formally signing a peace treaty. Iturup is also the largest island of the Kuril archipelago. Volcanoes sit side by side, with hot lakes and bizarre white cliffs stand out against the background of emerald forests. In the language of the Ainu, the name of the island means jellyfish. Same as Paramurshir, Iturup's economy is mostly all about fishing. However, it has another interesting sideline, rhenium. Wikipedia says that it has the world's only economically viable deposits of the rare metal. 40 tons per year are taken out of the Kudryavy volcano, together with volcanic gases. Iturup Airport was opened in 2014. It was the first airport built from scratch in Russia's post-Soviet history. You may have guessed by now that the islands this far south are all disputed, and Shikotan is definitely one of them. In September 1945, during the final days of World War II, the island, which had a population of some 1,000 inhabitants, was invaded by 600 Soviet troops. The Soviet Union agreed in 1956 to transfer it to Japan in the event of a peace treaty. But that never happened. A Japanese animated movie called Giovanni's Island was made depicting life on the island when Japanese and Soviet children lived together, before the Japanese were forcefully deported, that is. Sounds like a touching story. I think I need to add it to my watch list. Between the late 1950s and to the 1960s, the Soviet Union fortified the island with IS-2 and IS-3 heavy tanks, repurposed as coastal defense artillery, by digging them into the ground and employing them as fixed gun emplacements. None have been fired. Kuril Island is formed by 4 volcanoes, which were separate islands, but have since joined together by low-lying areas with lakes and hot springs. All these volcanoes are still active. Yuzhno Kurilsk, in terms of overall level of development, is clearly the de facto capital of the Kurils, as it's quite developed, almost city-like, with a population of around 6,000 people. This level of development is easier to achieve here, thanks to the fact that weather is simply less intense. The cars aren't only off-roaders. In the center of the town, a new Orthodox church has been built. On many of the buildings, satellite dishes can be seen, and new housing estates are almost completed. Like on the other Kurils, the population lives mostly off fishing. Plus, there are plenty of customs officers and border guards, and a military base. Being the southernmost of the Kuril Islands, it is claimed by Japan, but it is under Russian administration, despite it being some 20 or 25 kilometers away from the Japanese mainland. Not a very long distance, as this unidentified Russian man, who crossed the distance in a rubber boat, would tell you. At one point, the total population of the island was approximately 17,000, but after an earthquake that struck in 1994, it collapsed. So the population is reported as 7,800 all the way back in 2002, and has probably been declining ever since. And so, these islands simply speak for themselves, and to me at least, appear as some of the most curious destinations in the world. It takes a tough individual to survive here, and even tougher individual to love the place. However, there are things to love about it. You just need to know where to look, or just to look. This is my Patreon map. If you enjoyed this video, then please consider adding yourself here. Patreon or crypto are both very much appreciated.